What is up, everybody? Mr. Purse here. Welcome to Unit 5.1. This is on a time period called the Enlightenment. We're looking at 1750 to 1900. And just a little reminder here, this is our third time period. So our first time period was circa 1200 to 1450. Then we had 1450 to 1750. And now we have 1750 to 1900. This time period is going to take us through two units, Unit 5, obviously, and Unit 6. And then our last time period will be 7, 8, and 9. And really, as we look at these, each of these time periods, and we'll kind of reflect back on this when we get towards the end of the course, but each of these time periods has kind of their own characteristics that really define what's going on here. And what really makes this time period unique is this Enlightenment, which kind of sets off a chain of events that we'll get to over the next couple videos and next couple weeks. But before we get into the Enlightenment, I need to set it up for you, what we call contextualization. So if you're still struggling with understanding contextualization, it really is the causes or background on what happened before this period started. And we haven't even told you what the Enlightenment is yet, keeping you on the edge of your seat. But let me tell you what's going on prior to the Enlightenment happening so you'll understand a little better about what the Enlightenment is. So first things first, in the 1600s in Western Europe, and again, Western Europe is Spain, Portugal, although they're kind of on the downside. We have France, Britain, the Netherlands, the German states of what's going to eventually come join as Germany, are going through this period called the Scientific Revolution, which I'm sure you've heard about at some point in your life. Essentially what is in the Scientific Revolution is people start saying in Europe and in their colonies as well, science maybe isn't based on what the Bible teaches us. Maybe what my priest says at church or what the bishop says or the pope says isn't necessarily true, and maybe we should observe what we see in nature and what we see around us and come to scientific discoveries. And because of this, people start saying that science, maybe it's based on these laws or principles rather than biblical teachings or how people have interpreted the Word of God, for example. And the belief in scientific revolution is everything is observable, and if you observe it and you experiment with it, you can come to conclusions. An example of this, like science versus church teaching, is in the Catholic Church, which is the most prominent religion in Western Europe at this time that we're talking about. There was a belief of something called geocentrism, and that geocentrism said that the Earth was the center of the universe, and everything revolved around the Earth, and it really placed human beings at the center of God's creation. And priests and bishops and archbishops and pope referred to a passage in the book of Genesis, which is part of the Old Testament in the Bible, which essentially said where God told someone that the earth, the passage is that God commanded the earth to stand still. And from this one line in the Bible, people interpreted it to mean that the earth was the center of the universe because the earth stood still. Now, during the Scientific Revolution, people are observing the stars and notice the way that the stars rotate and the sun goes up and down. And they essentially come to the conclusion that this geocentrism, which would look like this right here, is not possible. And what really is happening is what is called heliocentrism. And helio is the Latin word for sun. And the sun is the center of the universe. So this observation is going to flip the church's teachings and what they've held to be the scientific truth for a thousand plus years, and now we're going to flip it, and now we're going to say we're going to use science to determine it. And it's not just this. There's other principles and other things that are going to be questioned, but it develops this idea of observation. Also, at this time, we have absolute monarchs. And if you remember from the Age of Exploration, absolute monarchs are going to gain a lot of power from the joint stock companies and taxation and just wealth coming into their countries. And these monarchs have their power centralized, and they believe that their power comes from God. And that's generally the way that European countries are ruling at this time, through these absolute, total control by these monarchs. And you can't question them, and they do what they say, and it's really ingrained with the belief in religion because they believe that their power comes from God. And if if God is speaking through the king, to question the king is to be like questioning God. And if you are devoutly religious, you don't want to question God, so you don't question the king. And that's the circular logic of that. Also, churches and the nobles are going to hold the most power. So the Catholic Church and the nobility, along with the king, are like the three pieces of the government that hold the most power and hold the most money and hold the most land and control the most stuff. So this is what's going on in the 1600s. Absolute monarchy, nobility, and church has power. And then the Scientific Revolution is kind of inserting itself into this. So from these things, and by the way, the scientific revolutionary thinkers did not get along well with the church for obvious reasons. As a result of this, we're going to see this emergence of this new idea in the late early 1700s, but really we're going to place it around 1750, which is called the Enlightenment. And when you hear the word Enlightenment, I want you to think in the cartoons where that light bulb kind of goes off in the character's head to like give them this new idea. And in this case, we have these new ideas which are going to enlighten or bring awareness to people. And in this case, the Enlightenment is an intellectual movement, really in Western, like I keep saying, Western Europe and its colonies, that's going to focus on what is called logic and reason. And logic is something like, it's dangerous. This is a logical step, so follow along here. It's dangerous to drive in the snow, right? Number 2, it's snowing out. Number 3, therefore, for me to drive would be dangerous. That's logic, okay? So you're taking 2 different factually based ideas and you're coming to a deductive or reasoning as a result of this. So this time period is going to focus on logical things. We're not going to say, hey, why is it this way? And someone's going to say, well, just look in the Bible. And we're going to say, no, no, no. We're going to observe what we see around us and try and come to our own conclusions. So instead of just taking what's told as facts, we question a lot of stuff and we try and come to decisions logically and through reason, through using our brain to come to decisions. This period of the Enlightenment is really going to focus on government structure and what is the best kind of government for the majority of people. Not what's best for the king, not what's best for the church, not what's best for the nobles, but what's best for the majority of people. And people had not really questioned this, and going back, at least in Europe, back to the Greco-Roman period. So I want to talk about this guy is the father of the Enlightenment. His name is John Locke, easy to remember because he is the key to the Enlightenment. Get it? Locke, key, boom. And he starts with a logical, reasonable starting point. And his logical, reasonable starting point is that people inherently, deep down inside of us, are naturally good and are trying to improve. Now, you can debate this of whether or not you think this is true, and some people think that people are evil and wicked, but Locke says that we're genuinely good people. And we're like, when a child is born, they aren't born evil. Things might happen to corrupt them over the course of their life to make them do evil things, but naturally, most people, the vast majority of us, want to do good stuff. And we want to improve and be better at whatever it is we're working on improving on. And because of this starting point of this logical reasoning that we are all good, he says the best kind of government is one in which people are going to discuss ideas and interact with each other. Meaning that by myself, I don't have all the answers. But if I interact with people, we share ideas and look to improve our thought process and discuss things and come to decisions, we're going to improve and get better as a society as a whole. This is the opposite of an absolute monarch who just makes the decisions based on what he or she feels is the best decision to make. Now we're interacting and talking through things. And as a result of this, the best kind of government has to be democracy. Because democracy is one in which the majority participate, discuss, vote, and make decisions on it. So that's his logic. People are good. If people are good and they need to improve, we need to interact. And if the best kind of government to interact is democracy, therefore democracy is the best government. That is logic and a reasonable conclusion. He also says that everybody has certain natural rights. And natural rights is a term that just means rights that you are born with, things that should never be taken away by any government. And these things that he says are natural rights are life, the right to live, liberty, the rights to certain freedoms, and then property. If you've heard the term life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness before, that is because the people who have revolutions in this time period, the American Revolution, for example, are going to take ideas of the Enlightenment thinkers. So, for example, Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence says life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. He just took Locke's idea of life, liberty, and property. Why he changed that, that's a different story for another day, but life, liberty, and property. There's other Enlightenment ideas that come out of this. So Locke kind of is the starter of this. He like gets everything going. And then other Enlightenment ideas emerge from this. One, and I just want to go over some of these terms because they pop up sometimes and just so you understand how they connect when we get into the revolutions. One is called social contract. This is the idea that that people, citizens of a country, have a deal basically, unwritten or written, with their leaders that sometimes leaders need to restrict the rights of citizens. So you have liberty, you have freedom, but not freedom to do just whatever you want to do. You need to, the government needs to make sure that the safety of the majority is happening. So for example, you can't go onto an airplane and be like, I got a bomb, ha 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 ha. And then they're like, okay, you're under arrest for saying bomb on an airplane, and then you're like, nah, it's my freedom of speech. I can do whatever I want. Doesn't work that way because you are risking people's safety by saying bomb. So they said, so in the United States, for example, you can't yell bomb on an airplane. You can't yell fire in a movie theater or in a restaurant and then be like, ha, 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 I was just joking. Freedom of speech. It doesn't work that way. You can't form a religion in this country where you murder people and then be like, it's my freedom of religion. You can't infringe on that because you need to ensure the safety of the majority. So the social contract says sometime we're going to limit liberty and rights of individuals. Another idea that emerges from the Enlightenment is separation of powers. The idea that we should have separate but equal branches of government that should check each other's power to make sure no one gains too much power in this country. This was developed by a guy whose name is probably important. You never know if you're going to see him. Baron de Montesquieu, good French name. And Montesquieu writes about these three equal branches of government. This idea of separation of powers is going to be implemented in most democracies around the world in this time period and in future democracies that are created even in the 20th and 21st century. Also, religion, like I said before, Enlightenment and scientific revolutionary ideas run contrary or contradict religion. Most Enlightenment thinkers say, we can't prove that God exists. We can't necessarily prove that there was a guy named Jesus who rose from the dead. And in their minds, to say that Jesus rose from the dead, in the minds of the Enlightenment thinkers, to say this is superstitious. You can't prove it. It's not logical to think that. Therefore, there's going to be a lot of tension with Enlightenment thinkers who critique religion and the power that religion has in Europe. And they're in comparison to what the church is teaching. So there's a lot of tension between the two. Lastly is something called the consent of the governed. The word consent means to give permission to. In this case, we are giving permission to the governed, the people who are under the rule of the government. The people who are governed give permission to rule. So instead of the leaders getting their power from God, we should hold democratic elections where the people give the leader permission to rule. So if a person campaigns on a certain promise and then they get elected, it should be expected that they carry out that promise because the governed gave consent for them to rule. This is a huge issue for the monarchs in Europe. You are taking away monarchs' power. They do not like this. They get their power from God. They don't want it from people. Lastly, and just kind of like the overall impact of this as we move forward, this is a key moment, this 100 years of Enlightenment ideas. These are going to inspire revolutions. They're going to inspire the American, the French, the Haitian, Spanish, Latin American revolutions are all going to be inspired by this. Then, in the next time period of 1900 to present, there's a whole bunch of other revolutions that are still going to be inspired by the Enlightenment. And when we talk in the United States, for example, about promoting freedom and servicemen and women who protect our freedom, we are talking about protecting the ideas that were created and thought of during the Enlightenment. So a lot of that connects back. Also, there's going to just be a lot of questioning of things and roles of people in society. So, for example, we're going to start questioning women's roles based on Enlightenment ideas. We're going to start questioning the forced labor, and we're going to see the rise of an abolitionist movement to end a lot of forced labor, especially chattel slavery in the Americas, and then the rights of eventually workers during the Industrial Revolution and what rights they have. My last kind of piece of this is these Enlightenment thinkers are not the revolutionaries. Montesquieu and Locke aren't taking up guns trying to kill the king. They aren't fighting with guns, they are fighting with the pen. They are just trying to create these ideas, and then other people are going to take their ideas and actually rise up and fight. So, that's the Enlightenment. Always gets me worked up. I get so excited about the Enlightenment. As always, you got any questions, you know what to do. Write it down, let me know. I'm out.